said that millions of dollars went to an organization, millions of taxpayer dollars went to an organization with terrorist ties, supposedly to help screen parolees to make sure they didn't have terrorist ties. So let's just talk a little bit about how this happened. In the fall of 2021, Congress passed and President Biden signed legislation providing about $1.7 billion in taxpayer funding to help settle for carrying out refugee and entrant assistance activities. That's the language from the statute. And much of that money was then made available to states. Have I got that right?
That's correct.
So we're talking about $1.7 billion originally, tens of millions, hundreds of millions that are available to states that then turn around and give it to grants in the form of grants to nonprofits. Have I got that right?
Exactly.
Now, where this nonprofit money goes is where the story gets interesting. These nonprofit groups are supposed to be helping with the settlement process. Some of them provided legal services to the refugees. Is that correct?
Yes, there was money for resettlement and separate money for legal services.
Got it. So how is it that money, taxpayer money, ends up in the hands of an organization, maybe multiple organizations that have terrorist affiliations? Tell us how this happened.
What happens when taxpayer money meant to protect national security quietly flows through back channels and ends up in the hands of organizations accused of supporting the very threats it was meant to prevent? In today's hearing, a disturbing trail is laid bare. Billions approved in the name of humanitarian aid, millions routed through state governments, and almost no transparency once the money reaches certain nonprofit groups. This isn't a partisan debate. It's a question of oversight, accountability, and whether the systems designed to protect the public are being exploited in plain sight. What you're about to hear raises serious concerns and even more serious questions about where your money actually went.
Thank you very much, Senator Cornyn. Ms. Marzouk, if I could just start with you. I want to start with something that you said a moment ago in your opening statement and that you also write about in your written testimony, because it's quite striking. You said that millions of dollars went to an organization, millions of taxpayer dollars went to an organization with terrorist ties, supposedly to help screen parolees to make sure they didn't have terrorist ties. So let's just talk a little bit about how this happened. In the fall of 2021, Congress passed and President Biden signed legislation providing about $1.7 billion in taxpayer funding to help settle for carrying out refugee and entrant assistance activities. That's the language from the statute. And much of that money was then made available to states. Have I got that right?
That's correct.
So we're talking about $1.7 billion originally, tens of millions, hundreds of millions that are available to states that then turn around and give it to grants in the form of grants to nonprofits. Have I got that right?
Exactly.
Now, where this nonprofit money goes is where the story gets interesting. These nonprofit groups are supposed to be helping with the settlement process. Some of them provided legal services to the refugees. Is that correct?
Yes, there was money for resettlement and separate money for legal services.
Got it. So how is it that money, taxpayer money, ends up in the hands of an organization, maybe multiple organizations that have terrorist affiliations? Tell us how this happened.
Well, I think there's plenty of fault to go around. The first should lie with the terrorist-supporting nonprofit that presents itself as a legitimate civil rights organization.
And what would that be?
That's the Council of American Islamic Relations, CARE.
So this is a group that you say has ties to terrorism. Explain why that is.
It's not my opinion. They were an unindicted co-conspirator in the 2008 Holy Land Foundation. And in that trial, the wiretap from the 1993 meeting in which CARE was founded was brought into the federal public record. In that meeting, they specifically state that they are going to present themselves as a legitimate civil rights organization while furthering the mission of Hamas.
So you have an American court proceeding that finds that this entity has direct ties to Hamas, may be part of a Hamas funding network, but yet they're getting money. How much money did they get from the federal government to shepherd Afghan parolees?
It's very hard to track the funding because some state fiscal oversight portals show it more clearly than others. I can say with certainty that in California, they received $15 million. In the state of Washington, they received more than $1 million. And I can say also that an affiliate of CARE, which is called ICNA, the Islamic Center for North America, which has its own documented ties to extremism and terrorism, was also subgranted $1 million.
$15 million in one state, millions in other states going to this entity. Did you say that following October 7th, the leaders of CARE celebrated the Hamas attacks, or did they condemn it? Which was it?
Multiple leaders are on public record celebrating the Hamas attacks. The National Executive Director, the CEO of CARE California, and the Executive Director of San Francisco CARE all publicly celebrated October 7th.
So you've got an organization that was founded in conjunction with Hamas that a federal court has found is linked to the funding network that is somehow getting millions and millions of taxpayer dollars to help Afghan parolees, supposedly to make sure that they're not associated with terrorism. This group's associated with terrorism. Now, when I look at the federal databases to see if there's any reference to CARE, I don't see anything. Why is that? How have they hid the fact they've gotten so much money?
That's correct, Senator, because the money went from Health and Human Services to the states and from the states to nonprofits. In fact, nonprofits could then subgrant further. So the money did not go directly from the federal government to CARE, but rather an intermediary, and that is how they've hidden the money.
It's like a dark money network. Tell me this. Is there any reason to believe that any of the representations that CARE made to the states were false, or did they use false names? Did they use false front organizations? I mean, what do we know?
Absolutely. So in California, the contract between CARE and the state of California for $7.2 million is in the name of CARE of Greater Los Angeles. CARE of Greater LA is not a legal entity. It does not have a federal EIN. It does not file a 990. CARE of California is a legal entity. But since CARE of Greater Los Angeles isn't an entity, there is no way to track that $7.2 million.
There's the cash out. So in other words, because the money was given to a non-legal entity, we can't follow it. Now, I thought you said just a moment ago in your testimony that fewer than half of the Afghans that CARE said they would help have actually been provided assistance, or that is fewer than half of the number they submitted. So where's the rest of the money gone?
Well, in California, CARE is involved in an all-of-society political activism approach. They have paid activists in city councils, in school boards, lobbied in the state legislature to further their extremist agenda. I cannot say with certainty that that's where the federal dollars went, but I can say that on the ground, we see the political radicalization from CARE in every aspect of California civic life.
Were they involved in any way in anti-Israel, anti-Jewish protests after October 7th that we saw all over the country?
Absolutely. CARE's leadership was present at the universities of California and the Cal State campuses, and in fact, gave sermons and speeches on those campuses.
So for all we know, the money could have gone there. I mean, my point is, and thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, we need to find out where this money has gone. This is a scandal. This is corruption. And we've got to figure out how taxpayer money has ended up in the hands of yet another organization with terrorist ties. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
As the questioning continues, a troubling picture begins to form, not from speculation, but from how the funding pipeline itself was designed. In late 2021, Congress approved roughly $1.7 billion for refugee and entrant assistance following the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. The intention was clear: help resettle vulnerable Afghans while ensuring proper security screening. But the structure of the program created a critical blind spot. Instead of the money flowing directly from the federal government to vetted organizations, it moved through multiple layers. Federal agencies distributed funds to states. States then issued grants to nonprofit organizations. Those nonprofits, in turn, were allowed to subgrant portions of the money to other groups. With each layer added, oversight weakened and transparency faded. This is where serious concerns arise. Some of the organizations receiving these funds present themselves as civil rights or humanitarian groups, offering legal aid or resettlement services. Yet questions were raised about whether certain recipients had documented ideological or operational ties to extremist movements overseas. In at least one high-profile federal court case from the late 2000s, evidence was introduced showing that an organization now receiving state-distributed funds had previously been identified as connected to a foreign terrorist financing network. Despite that history, millions of dollars were still awarded across several states. Tracking the money proved difficult. Federal databases showed no direct payments, giving the appearance that the organization had received nothing at all. But the reason was procedural, not factual. The funds never moved straight from Washington. They passed quietly through state agencies and nonprofit intermediaries, effectively shielding the full picture from public view. Even more troubling were the contracts themselves. In one state, a multi-million-dollar grant was issued under the name of a regional affiliate that on paper does not legally exist. It has no federal tax identification number, does not file public financial disclosures, and does not submit required nonprofit reporting forms. As a result, once the money left state control, it became nearly impossible to trace where it went or how it was used. Meanwhile, the outcomes didn't match the promises. The nonprofit claimed it would assist a certain number of Afghan parolees with legal and settlement services. Yet records and on-the-ground reporting suggest that less than half of those individuals actually received the help that was promised. That raises a simple but critical question. If the services weren't delivered, where did the remaining funds go? While no definitive conclusion was presented during the hearing, witnesses pointed to a pattern of extensive political activism by the same organizations, activities that appear unrelated to refugee resettlement. These include lobbying efforts, organized protests, campus demonstrations, and public messaging campaigns, some of which escalated sharply following the October 7 attacks in Israel. Several organizational leaders were publicly recorded praising or celebrating those attacks rather than condemning them, an action that stands in direct conflict with the values most taxpayers would expect their money to support. At minimum, the situation exposes a system vulnerable to abuse. At worst, it suggests that public funds may have indirectly supported organizations advancing extremist narratives, all while operating behind layers of bureaucracy that obscure accountability. This isn't just a budgeting issue, it's a trust issue. Taxpayer dollars are supposed to serve the public good, especially when national security, humanitarian aid, and public safety intersect. When oversight fails, when transparency disappears, and when millions of dollars vanish into administrative shadows, the public has every right to demand answers. No one is arguing against helping refugees. The question is whether the systems designed to help were quietly repurposed, and whether warning signs were ignored along the way. If this money trail remains unexamined, it won't be the last time accountability slips through the cracks. And if Congress doesn't follow the money now, the cost won't just be financial, it will be measured in public trust. Because when the truth is buried under bureaucracy, the consequences don't stay hidden for long.